This is 24 in 42. Welcome to 24 in 42. I am your host, Jason Waltz, and I get to welcome another Jason today. This is a game master extraordinaire and very widely read and knowledgeable REH scholar, Jason Durall. Did I say that right?
You did indeed. Got
Excellent.
it one.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was born in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, moved around a lot due to my dad's job, setting up different companies all over America, or rather, all over the Pacific Northwest mostly. Traveled quite a bit once I got older, lived in Japan for 6 years. Now I am living here in Berlin, Germany, and working full time as a game designer, editor, and writer for various tabletop RPG companies and the occasional computer game.
Spectacular. You and I have been fortunate to work together on two nonfiction books
Yes.
I was able to put out. I will be
Yes.
showing these much better in drop-in pictures.
Okay, cool.
I'll be taking notes as we do the questions, so any authors or books you reference, I will be including them in the final video.
Fantastic.
All right, I have shared in advance 16 of the 24 questions with Jason, so he is able to rattle the answers off rather than go, oh, good question, and think about it. But there are 8 that are slightly tongue in cheek, put them on the spot. We will get our timer going here and see how we do.
All right.
Number 1, what color do you write in?
Black primarily, although if I'm revising text, I turn it blue, and then I turn it black again when it's actually ready to be submitted.
Okay. All right. I am a person who I'm a reader of characters, I'm a writer of characters, and I actually teach a character writing class. So many of these questions are about characters. Number 1 is, how do you give depth to your own characters, and do you treat different level characters differently?
Yeah, I mean the primary way I think that I define the way that I give characters depth is I usually give an insight into what they're thinking about or why they're thinking about a particular thing. And I try to make that, if not relatable, understandable so that the readers get a sense of, oh, this is why this guy is doing this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be a reason that they sympathize with, but it should be something that they understand. Whereas sort of tertiary characters, I find it's easier to keep their motives and their inner life a little unknowable.
Sure. Since I've never written for any gaming system at all. Is there any difference at all in developing a character?
Quite a lot. You, well, I mean, there's mechanics, which can give you a number of insights into characters that aren't told in dialogue and they aren't told in description. Like you can, for example, games like Pendragon, you can actually personality traits are written
Sure.
out and codified in terms,
Okay.
and so you can say things like he has a lustful 14 score, whereas his chaste score is only 6
Okay.
because these numbers have to add up. So you go, okay, you just see these two numbers balanced, and you know, well, he's going to be hitting on people. He's going to be a little bit of a Lothario.
Right.
And in other things, sometimes it can be some just simple little funny joke, like you give a character skill in pointless small talk, 75%. And you go, oh, well, this character is going to be sort of talking your ear
Yeah.
off with no apparent purpose. So there's a lot of mechanical ways you can create and instill depth in characters other than just dialogue and description of like physical traits.
Right. Okay. I like that. And all those were obvious if I would have thought about it for a second. City or country kid? Where did you grow up? Did you have any friends when you went out and played your adventures, or were you all by yourself?
Town and country. I grew up in a lot of small towns in Oregon and Washington. And whenever my parents had 3 kids, and so whenever summers came around, they did their best to sort of offload one of us onto my grandparents who lived out in the countryside.
Okay.
So because I was always sort of the most independent of our group of kids, my sister and my brother, I would often be the one who would be out at the countryside, also helping my grandfather work the farm.
Okay.
So I did a lot of farm work. I did, helping feed cattle and horses and chickens and all of that, taking part in branding times, collecting dead animals when they fell, that kind of stuff. So I was out in the countryside quite a bit over the summers. And when I was in the city or in the towns, I usually had a group of friends that we had pretty rich lives. We would just disappear on our bicycles for the day, maybe descend on somebody's house for bologna and cheese sandwiches at lunch, and then be off again collecting returnable bottles so that we could play computer games and buy comic books at the 7-Eleven. And then out in the countryside, I would frequently take big piles of books and just go out and hike in my grandparents' farmland in the nearby forest areas. And I'd climb up in a tree and read a book. I was a little bit of into that country lifestyle thing.
I have asked that. I did that. I climbed up into trees and read a book, and so far no one's agreed with me, but you, there we go.
Oh, no. Well, I frequently ended up getting chased by cows if I managed to turn the wrong way. So climbing up in a tree was the safest way to read a book without getting disturbed.
Awesome. What is your timeline like on a project, from initial idea to any research, first draft, until you finally say this is good?
I mean, that it really depends on the piece. If it's fiction, it's like whenever I think about it to whenever I start working on it, it could be decades. I've got ideas in my story folder that I'm still pulling out and working on, things that I scratched out when I was in college, ideas for stories or whatnot that are still have yet to take form. In the writing for games, pretty much projects have a lifespan of anywhere between 2 to 3 years to 3 to 4 months. They can be pretty rapid development sometime. And since my game design career, I have the unique luxury of everything I write is published for the most part. Okay. There's always somebody waiting for my work to be turned in. Sure. So that's a little different. I go to a writer's group a couple of times a week, and most of the other people there are sort of, well, I'm thinking of working on a screenplay, I'm doing a novel, I'm writing some short stories, and I'm like, I've got a deadline, I've got to get this thing done. And so I'm like the weirdo who everything I write is going to be sent off to somebody immediately.
You're the guy who gives the rest incentive, though. I've been in lots of groups, and we needed people like you because it makes people write. When you are writing, what usually assails your ears?
I love to play music that is either, if I'm in fiction world, I play music that is appropriate to the setting that I'm writing in. And if I'm writing for a licensed IP, which I do a lot of for role-playing games, I usually try to immerse myself in the soundtrack for that, or music that would be appropriate for that setting. So I listen to a lot of weird fantasy stuff when I'm writing RuneQuest, or some really old, here's people chanting in Mesopotamian, to get into that groove. When I was working on the Terminator RPG, I was listening to that Terminator, all of the Terminator soundtracks in one big playlist. When I've written Conan, I know every note of Basil Polidoris's Conan Symphony from the first film.
That is awesome. Hey, if you could live in a yellow submarine, would you?
Yeah, I think I might. It sounds pretty fun, and the cartoon deeply impacted my childhood. So yes.
You're the first one. Okay.
Oh, in a heartbeat. When I was a kid, we used to watch all those weird animated films. My grandparents had a film projector, or rather my aunt and uncle had a film projector, and on the 4th of July, there was that period between the barbecue lunch and then when it gets dark enough to do fireworks. They would just send all the kids into the basement and spool Yellow Submarine, The Point, and all of these
Oh
really
man,
weird films. And so those things are a deep part of my creative DNA.
that's sweet. That's cool. Which of your own characters, and I know this might be challenging since you write in so many worlds, but I'd like to narrow in on one you've created yourself, would you
I
like to hang out with as a close companion?
I am. It hasn't been published, but I'm writing a sort of a kind of weird fantasy with elements of science fiction buried into the deep background, with a main character named Relic, who is kind of fun,
Okay.
and I like that
Okay.
guy.
Fun.
You wouldn't be able to find
No.
anything unless you started looking at my hard drive.
That'll be a minute before we get to that. Okay. Um, you're in both worlds, straddling fiction and a lot of resources building some of that fiction, so you do read a lot of nonfiction. What is it you typically read, and is there anything you're currently reading or recommending?
Let's see. I have been. I love to read books like nonfiction when I'm reading nonfiction stuff about like histories of very specific things, like the histories of libraries or sailing travel in the ancient world. This kind of stuff really
Yeah.
gets my, or how merchant caravans worked in, the Middle East. And so that kind of stuff really interests me. I love like deep dives into a particular topic. Um, Currently, right now, I'm kind of on a bit of a fiction break, and I'm reading a book by Daniel Polanski called The March's End.
Okay.
And I'm quite taken a fancy to his writing lately.
Okay. Cool. Do you have your own? I mean, obviously, I see a little bit of your books there. Your own resources, or is it mostly internet, or do you have a nearby a library?
I'm in. I have a large library of my own. About two-thirds of what's next to me here are RPGs,
Okay.
and the stuff behind me is fiction, and over there that's all comics and big graphic novels and things like that. I tend to overspend on research materials. The internet is great. Libraries are not as useful for me here because I don't read German well enough to
Okay.
be able to research in it. And the American libraries and the English language sections in the various libraries are limited
Sure.
at best. And I find, like I say, when I'm looking for something like I'd like a deep dive on how merchant caravans in
Yeah.
the 8th century worked, I'm not really going to find that on the shelf of the American library here in town.
Where do you find it? Only online?
Yeah,
Okay.
Amazon is my friend in this
Okay.
case. Or whenever I can, I try to patronize my local bookstores, and
Sure.
they've grown quite patient with my weird orders.
I think that'd be a hoot looking for things for you.
I would love a part-time researcher, but if as long as they're willing to work for, I guess, virtual wine.
Titles. Do you find them challenging? Do they come easy? And when do they usually hit you? Do you start with it? Does it come after you're all done? How often do you change them?
Usually very easy. I don't think I have much of a problem with titles, and oftentimes the title is the first thing I think of.
Okay.
Like I say, I have a series, like a folder, that is just nothing but empty files with names of things, sometimes with little parentheses with a this is what that's about. But
Right.
oftentimes titles come first. The title may change later, but I oftentimes the title is really instrumental in starting the piece.
Yep. I'm very similar with that too. That's funny, and I'll put in parentheses the character if I've already got one pre-made that I think it falls into his world or not.
Cool. Nice.
So breakfast time, and it's bread heavy. What are you choosing? Waffles, French toast, pancakes, crepes, or bagels?
Ooh, that is a really good question. Their bagels, for obvious historical reasons, are not really commonly found here in Berlin. Um, but they are making a comeback. But overall, I just got a waffle maker in the last 3 to 4 months, and I've been kind of on a waffle kick.
All
So
right.
I would say waffles out of those, or if breakfast tacos could like sneak in,
Yeah.
breakfast tacos.
Are you experimenting with that waffle maker, doing those potato waffles and things?
I haven't done potato, but the last one involved Eyre liqueur, which is basically eggnog. Um,
Oh, interesting.
He'd given me a bottle of eggnog for Christmas, and I had just about enough to do some highly eggnoggy waffles. And my girlfriend said she thought they were the best waffles she'd ever eaten.
Awesome. I have to mention that to my wife. That sounds tasty.
They were quite good.
Would you live in any of the worlds you've created and why?
Um, uh, no. Usually I'm writing about worlds in conflict. The novel I'm currently working on is set in the now of Berlin. And so maybe I would just say, yes, I will. I'll say that. I'd like to live where I'm living now.
All right.
Yeah, but no, most of the things I'm working on, I've got a few projects here and there, and one is a thing set around the turn of the century in the Middle East, or the turn of the millennia in
Okay.
the Middle East, and that's just all of my research indicates I would not want to live there. And no, the more I know about places, the least pleasant they seem to be for somebody who enjoys things like eggnog, waffles,
Right.
and espresso coffee.
And a little bit of air conditioning now and then.
Right, right. I haven't started writing utopian science fiction yet, but when I get there, I'll probably want to do something there.
All right, here's one of my favorite questions since I'm a character guy. I like to know who you think writes the characters you most enjoy reading.
That one is Roger Zelazny, just full stop.
All right.
Roger Zelazny, I mean, frequently his characters, there can be a little bit of sameness between protagonists in that they're always very intelligent, like men, usually in their late 30s, 40s or so, with some perhaps ridiculously extended life experience. They turn out to be immortal, or they've been born again, or they have access to memories of past lives. But I always find that he writes these characters who have a lot of texture to them
Sure.
and certain elegance in the way they move through the world. And I quite enjoy Zelazny's stuff.
Awesome. Do you think there's a difference? I've read the Amber series. A lot of people think there's a huge difference between the first five and the last five books. Do
Oh,
you?
absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Common thread.
Right. I think that Roger was really into the deep world building in the first one, and then for the first set, and then for the second one, he wanted a slightly younger protagonist, and he was kind of experimenting a lot with sort of story and momentum in ways that he didn't in the first ones.
Okay. Interesting timing. I work part time at a local bookstore, and a lady, probably in her mid 30s, two little children. We have a very large children's section. They come to play. Well, she got talking to me about 4 months ago, and I don't remember her exact question, but she was looking for like a large figure from the 70s and 80s that had a lot of influence. So after a lot of conversation, I gave her that Amber book, the omnibus of all 10. Well, she came
Nice.
in Monday and said, and I remembered her face, but I did not remember the conversation. And she said, "That book you gave me was awesome. I absolutely loved it. What else can I get like that?" And so it took a long time to get there because she couldn't remember the name of the author
Oh
and
no.
the book. And she told me there was 4 books in it. So I was really digging. And then all of a sudden she saw it on the shelf. She's like, "That one right there." So that was really cool. She
I
absolutely
had,
delighted in that.
I had two weird experiences related to Roger Zelazny. The first one, I was going to get the fourth of the second Amber book series
Okay.
at a local bookstore, and I stopped in and I picked it up and I put it down on the counter. It was at a Walden Books in
Ooh.
Yakima, Washington. And the woman behind the counter, she looks at the name and she said, "That's my godfather." And I
Wow.
went, "What?" And she said, "Yeah, yeah, my father was friends with him back in New Mexico, and so Roger Zelazny is my godfather. He sends me Christmas cards every year and birthday cards, and I just thought, oh, that's neat. I asked, is your name Amber? And she said, no, but my father said he was considering that, which I thought was kind of cool. And then sadly, I was working on the Amber role-playing game, and the publisher arranged to have me meet Roger Zelazny. I was flying over to Gen Con in Indianapolis, or actually that might have been when it was in Milwaukee. I was flying over from Japan, where I'd been living at the time, for this summer vacation and going to go to Gen Con. I'm so excited. I've got an interview with Zelazny, a list of questions that would help my the book that I was writing for the RPG. And then I'm looking at Time magazine on the flight over, and there's an obituary for Zelazny. This is the first I find out that he had died. I was just rushed.
Yeah.
Very sad.
Oh, that would be quite a turn. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, he had a very long and interesting life, and, missing an interview with me is probably, not really.
Well, it might not have mattered to him, but.
Oh, no.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, I'm always tickled when I get to meet these guys that have been writing for, 40, 50 years. I'm always flattered, in fact, getting to work with them at all, period.
Very cool. Yeah, well, a lot of great names on those 2 books you've published so far.
My daughter's thinking of going to Australia this summer, or this fall, I guess, and I'm like, ooh, maybe you can take a couple books and track down Keith Taylor.
Oh, nice. Is he in Australia?
He is in Australia, yes. Otherwise, I'm never going to get that signature.
Like whereabouts?
She keeps asking me, and I got to look up his address. I have it. I don't remember right now.
I have a lot of friends in Melbourne.
Okay. So, that's I'm pretty sure where she's planning on going. So, but
great city.
Cool. Good to know. All right. So if I invited you to that character writing class that I hold, and I allowed you to give one piece of writing advice, one sentence, what would you say to the class?
I would say, that's a very good question. Probably, sadly, it might be don't quit your day job, because it makes things a lot easier to be a writer, or marry well. But no, I would just say, just find whatever fire that you have, and, warm yourself with it and continue to push forward. And even if you're dead, if you're dead inside and the tank is empty, keep going. Write a description of everything on your grocery list. Just do anything to just keep working, because if you depend on inspiration as your fuel for writing, you're going to be subject to the ebb and tide of that. And maybe another piece of advice would be figure out what recharges you and rely on it. For me, it's going to cool history museums,
okay,
and looking at ancient cultures, and sort of just immersing myself in that kind of art on a regular basis. It's tax deductible here. And so I find that is the thing. So maybe find a way to recharge your creative spark and rely on it.
That is the awesomest single sentence, 3 pieces of advice I've ever got.
Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah, I teach, obviously it's different for everyone, and I try to impress on people that I don't technically believe in writer's block. I believe you can be blocked on what you want to write.
Yeah.
But if you get over that, I have to write this particular thing, and just allow yourself to write, you can segue between things. And there's so many times I've started out writing a fantasy, get stuck, and suddenly I'm writing a Western, and then I'm journaling to my dead grandfather, who I used to always talk things about, and then I'm back on my fantasy because my brain's still been freaking working in the background.
Right. Yeah, it's just a matter of keep the wheels turning, and eventually you're going to touch down on the path you want to be on.
Yep.
But you're not going to get there if you stand still.
Right. If you're going to, or don't sit down in that chair and do it. What is the best thing you think you have ever spent money on to further your own writing?
It was actually for my role-playing game mastering, but it was a thin booklet called the Everyone Everywhere List. And I was at a gaming convention, Gen Con, and I looked at this thing. It looked cheap it still looks cheap. It was just this cheap little, like, kind of clearly somebody had photocopied it and folded it, 16 pages, 24 pages, like that. And it was just these lists of names, just endless lists of names with like dice rolls so that you could roll randomly for the names. And it was broken up into different countries, surnames, family names, of just all different cultures and whatnot. And I looked at it, it was $5, and I just thought, this thing looks so cheap. And I started to walk away, and then I went, wait a second, it could be useful, and it's only $5.
Right.
So I went back, bought it. Like 25 years later, I have used it in every professional job I have had since then.
Wow.
I have used it for every game line I have worked on, and I've probably used it for every like actual game in terms of naming characters is one of the, I think, the most challenging thing for many people, but I find it really easy with this resource. I know it's available on Drive-Thru RPG these days, and it's been expanded, and it still looks pretty cheap, but it's incredibly useful. I've had people, I've gone through photocopies of it over the years, traveling with it, and I finally bought an electronic version of it so that I could just have it and keep printing copies whenever they wear out.
That sounds cool. Okay.
I highly recommend it. Tell them I sent you.
That's yeah. This has been a fun answer. They've I think I've only had one repeat so far out of 13 interviews.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it makes writing for yourself more difficult or a little easier if you feel emotions strongly?
That's like a yes and no question. It really depends on the piece and what I'm writing. Okay. If I'm writing like an essay that touches my personal life, the emotional context is strong. If I'm writing game rules or something that I'm not emotionally invested in, sometimes I find a clinical approach is the best. So that one is all over the place. I was doing a lot of writing for a computer game based on the what do you call that show? Shadow and Bone, the show on Netflix. It was for a Netflix computer game that unfortunately was pretty much abandoned the moment it was released. But it was really fun getting into the characters, the mindset of the characters, and working from there. And I found that I did try to immerse myself in that sort of, like, what would it be like to be these sort of just slightly post-teens in this this weird setting. And so the emotional ups and downs there, it was romance and sweeping adventure and all of that. That I think helped. But the technical aspects of the job too, formatting dialogue so that it can be easily imported into a computer game, that kind of stuff you need to be absolutely emotionless about.
Sure, I could understand that. You brought up a very intriguing example for me because I'm fascinated by the character Kaz. How was that to get in his head?
Pretty fun. I mean, he was only a minor character in the character stuff I wrote. The game was basically threaded narrative of different main characters, and I wrote for Jesper and some of Alina's chapters, and Kaz was a sort of a character in the Jesper scenes, and a few pieces with I've forgotten her name, the acrobatic thief woman who's anyway. Yes.
Okay.
It's amazing how quickly that stuff goes.
That's you get to work in so many worlds. Do you find that challenging to separate sometimes if they're back to back?
The only time, honestly, I find it a little challenging is I've now worked on like 3 or 4 different incarnations of Conan RPGs, and sometimes I'm having a hard time keeping track of, what was published, where did this come from, and sometimes background details. I have to remember that was invented for this RPG, and it's not canonical Howard stuff.
Okay.
But for the most part, I find it pretty easy to keep track of stuff.
I'm going to skip to this one just because we're fitting it in here, but this is probably very challenging for you because you've done a lot of them. If you could write any other character from any medium, would you? And who?
Oh, I would love to write a Cull novel
Oh,
or
okay.
a novella of some sort. Robert E. Howard's Barbarian King, the precursor to Conan. I find him to be a much more interesting and compelling character than Conan. He's much more broody and more philosophical, and he's troubled by things,
Yeah,
which is never true of Conan.
true.
And so I find he's a lot more relatable. Like sometimes he's worried about doing the right thing. He's tied up with decorum, like what does the court say? What are the laws of this land? And so I think that it's kind of interesting to have a character like that. Conan is if I want it, I take it. And Cull is a little more like, what would be the repercussions of what happened if I did this? And
Sure.
I think, and there's also that weird dream-like logic to the Cull stories where things don't always seem to make sense. And I kind of like that ambiguity of setting.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad that you had a great answer right away. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been on my mind for years and years.
All right. Here's one everyone's waiting for. Your three favorite books as a child.
Okay, now you mentioned, I think this is pre 18 years old.
Yes, sir.
Okay, then pre 18. I had to look up publication dates for one of these, and I think it squeaks in. The
Okay.
first one, I would say, in order of my experience of them,
Okay.
would be Little Nemo in Slumberland. My grandmother got this very, very large, like one of these collector editions of Little Nemo
Sure.
comics. I think they were printed at the page size of the newspaper. So it was this giant book. She had it on loan from like an interlibrary loan from the Library of Congress or whatever. And it was just this massive book and with these full color comics of Winsor McCay's Little Nemo.
Okay.
And those just set my mind afire with coolness of that setting and that weird and interesting thing. The next one I would say would be E.R.R. Edison's The Worm Ouroboros, which I hit way too early in my life. I would think I was like 13 or 14 when I started. It took me a couple of tries to get into it. It's written in this sort of King Jamesian English and is a challenge. I know many people who have tried and failed, but that book also just ignited all sorts of creative imagery in my brain. And the
Did, did
last,
did you work your way through it, or did you have to restart it?
I restarted it a few times. It's got this weird introductory sequence that you could entirely skip.
Yeah.
Like you literally skip the first 10 pages or so of the book and you would be fine. It just sort of begins in our world, and there's a guy who does an astral journey to this other place, and then he's forgotten about entirely.
It's
Like he was
fascinating that you were able to do that at 14.
Yeah, it's quite the book.
Okay.
And then the other one would be Michael Moorcock's The Warhound and the World's Pain,
All right.
which I found to be one of my absolute favorite of the Michael Moorcock novels.
Awesome. There'll be a screen with all three of these up with everyone. So, hey, what worries you most? Lava, quicksand, spider webs, or sharks?
Uh, Probably spider webs, because I think the likelihood of me in central Germany of encountering sharks or lava or quicksand is very, very low.
I hear that.
So yeah, I would say spider webs almost definitely, and those I'm not really bothered by.
Right.
Maybe I live a carefree life.
Speaking of that, when you're all done writing for the day, you've called it quits for the day. Are you exhausted? Just want a hot bath and a good drink, or are you ready to rumble and get out of the house?
Um, Usually a little bit of both. In Germany, there's a word, Feierabend. It means like the end of the day and time to transition into the evening of whatever. It's like your vacation, your
Okay.
Feierabend. Um, and I quite enjoy the practice of Feierabend. And so, I'm probably a little bit of have a drink, maybe start thinking about dinner, and then maybe go out later, to a nearby beer garden in the summer or somewhere pleasant and hang out, or, sit on my balcony and, watch street life and read a good book.
Sure. It looks like I'm privy to a couple of your Facebook posts that you also get to game rather often.
I do get to game quite a bit, not as often as I would like, but quite a lot. And so, yeah, that's kind of a defining thing of what I like to do. And having a girlfriend who's moving to Berlin soon and is quite into board games and other kinds of games, makes that quite opens up all kinds of opportunities.
Sure. Good. All right, these are 10 first thoughts.
Oh.
I'm just going to throw out a word and whatever you first think of.
Okay.
Battle axe.
Hagar the Horrible.
Nice. Convoy.
Well, that would be that song by, would that be Chris Christopherson? Or I don't know who that was, but I'm thinking of the song from the 70s.
Okay.
The TV movie.
Dystopian.
Yeah, every young adult fiction novel these days.
Yeah, no kidding. Green.
That would be Emerald Forest, or the Emerald Tablets.
There you go. Danger.
Will Robinson. I think that would be Robbie the Robot in a heartbeat.
Whistle.
Whistle stop, as in the old political, we're in the political realm right now, and I would say the whistle stop tour, the whole idea that a train whistle would blow and then everybody would come to the train platform and hear a presidential candidate or a politician rattling off the back of the train.
Yep. Edgar.
Poe. Absolutely.
It's always interesting to see with people Poe or Burroughs.
Okay. I thought right for a microsecond.
There's that. Spider. Oh, I should have skipped that one or changed that one.
Oh, I'll go with the Spider, that pulp hero with two guns who kind of wore some sort of a mask that had a spider on it.
Yep. Bounty.
Bounty, paper towels.
I like it. And hummingbird.
That would be Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali. Float like a hummingbird, sting like a bee.
I like it. Great thoughts. What is the most difficult thing you have ever written?
Oof. I was working on the Battlestar Galactica RPG before it got canceled. And so this book never got published, but it was the Colonial source book. And I was put in charge of weaponry, like a whole chapter on weapons. And so I had to sort of create this alternate world history of the military arms industry, for like Caprica and all of these other like planets. And so I was coming up with all these parallels of these like names and brands. So you could kind of go, oh, it's sort of like Smith and Wesson, but it's not. And I don't know. I'm not a really I don't know. I'm not really into that, but I can do it well. And so I found that it was just a little depressing, like reading about the history of arms development. And the other part was really hard was in a whole section on terrorism on the fleet. If you're familiar with Battlestar Galactica, like the idea that you're taking a commuter flight and then suddenly somebody comes over the intercom and says, hey, this flight's going to be going for the next 3 years. Make yourselves comfortable. And so you had terrorist activities where people were striking back against the fleet and whatnot. And so trying to come up with ideas for like, how would you improvise an explosive if you were on an airplane? Yeah. How would you come up and make weapons if you were on like the equivalent of a yacht? And so that kind of stuff, all this notion of people put in these desperate situations where they feel they have to arm themselves to strike back against the tyranny of a military fleet, rescue fleet, basically. That kind of put me in, I would say, sort of a dark place, and probably made my internet search history of immense interest to various security agencies across the world.
And then it never saw light, huh? Ugh.
Yeah. No, no. That does happen quite a bit for RPGs, sadly, is things get written and they get accepted, you get paid, but then they just go nowhere.
Okay. Sort of like having books or stories optioned and screenplays written and they never go anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. We are at 38 minutes and we only have a few left, so we're doing well.
Cool. Cool.
Will you share your favorite quote, or I tweaked this a little bit since sending it to you, song, lyric, poem, motivational thought, whatever it is that you like or hanging around your office, and who said it?
That would be Robert E. Howard's little quote from Conan to be lit in the story Queen of the Black Coast. And I even put it up on my screen here to the side, where he says, "Let me live deep while I live. Let me know the rich juices of red meat and the stinging wine on my palate, the hot embrace of white arms, the mad exultation of battle when the blue blades flame and crimson, and I am content. Let the teachers and priests and philosophers brood over questions of reality and illusion. I know this. If life is illusion, then I am no less an illusion, and being thus, the illusion is real to me. I live, I burn with life, I love, I slay, and am content." And that is, that just, it sends chills up my spine whenever I read it.
Same here.
Yep.
Do you think you'll ever be able to hit Howard Days?
Oh God, I want to. And it's sometimes I feel it's almost comical that, like, I was literally in Texas 2 days after there, just this last time. And I find it's just being in Germany makes it quite a bit more difficult.
Oh,
but
sure.
When I was living in Austin, it was incredibly weird because I would like lose track of it and then find that, oh, I've got to go to a wedding in Seattle the same weekend as Howard Days or something. I had 10 years of living in Austin where I just could not make it to save my life for one reason or another, or I got sick or something happened. So
They have
I hope
poetry night on the last night that Indy usually leads, and that's that quote is actually what I usually read because I think that's the most poetic thing that Howard ever wrote.
Yeah, yeah, and the fact that unfortunately, be it what it is, most people have this image of Conan as being practically illiterate or being able to just bark short sentences.
Right.
And that's about it due to the film. But, that is one of the most poetic expressions of one's life.
Right, exactly.
Little monologue.
All right. Who is the visual artist that creates the artwork that most moves you?
I would say Barry Windsor Smith.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and his work led me into the pre-Raphaelites, the Craftsman movement, helped me discover William Morris and all these other amazing artists, Gabriel Rossetti, anyway, all of those type of people.
Yeah.
And then I would say also, if I had to pick another, it would be Mike Mignola, who I've seen his art come from being kind of crude and whatnot back in the days when he was doing illustrations for Comics Journal and early Chaosium products to now where he's just created this absolute economy of darkness and light and line work that is amazing.
He is,
but I would say
it is quite striking the path, the improvement, for lack of a better word, of his career. Yeah. Yep. And the last question. What are you trying to share in your writing, if anything?
I would say just an appreciation for the texture and the unexpected parts of life, or the things that you notice that are not necessarily the most obvious things. I like to point out details about cultures and about the people that I write about in both RPGs and fiction. I like to describe things in sometimes uncharacteristic ways and surprise with depth of character that is hopefully unexpected. Cool. So I would say that really just trying to enjoy the texture of something. maybe more than like the big obvious messages. I don't really care that much for writing with characters that are metaphors for things or whatnot. I enjoy instead the idea of characters that feel like they are lived in.
Right. Good. No, I appreciate that. Definitely make us look at the little things. Take the time to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, with characters, giving them weird little quirks or just personality things, maybe so and so likes to, chew on their fingernails or just little things that you go, oh, that's not something I would have expected from a character like that. I wonder where that came from.
Sure. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we did it in 43 minutes, so we did very well and got some really cool answers. Thank you very much, Jason.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, now this is your opportunity to tell us 3 C's. Something cold that you'd like a little bit more eyes on, something current, and something coming if you can share.
Okay, I would say something cold. One of the things, I was the line editor for the Conan RPG that was being run by Modiphius back in the day of the heydays of the pandemic and whatnot. And the line was short-lived. I think it lasted 5 years from beginning to end. But my absolute favorite book of that line was the Cull source book. And I think that is just the writers that I worked with were magnificent. It was a great crew, and everyone came into it with this love for that material and that character. And I think that it is a tribute. We managed to license art from Justin Sweet. And so that was cool. Having a book illustrated by Justin Sweet primarily was pretty darn nifty. And I mean, when I took the job, I ended up running into Frederick Malmberg at a party in London. And I said, hey, can I do a Cull book for the Conan RPG? And he said, yes. And so then I turned and told the publisher, yes, I will be the line editor on that project. That was kind of the deal breaker, make or breaker. Yeah. And so that was cold. The next one would be current. I am working with the people at Chaosium on the new edition of Basic Role Playing and a line of products to support that. Okay. We just came out with a Game Master screen that was available at Gen Con, and we're going to be doing other books in that line over the months to come. I can't reveal anything more about them at that time, but they should be obvious by the time this interview goes live. And then the next one would be, what was that?
Something coming further down the line, or a secret project that you might just hint at.
It's not a secret. The Lords of the Middle Sea game is also on my horizon, and I've been working on that as recently as yesterday, and that is just a phenomenally fun game to work on. It's sort of I would say it's a post-apocalyptic game with hope, like rebuilding the world. And in the game, you play a airship crew traveling around the skies over the Middle Sea Empire, which is the giant sea that formed in the middle of the United States after a gigantic earthquake and cataclysmic collapse of the ecosystem. So there's this giant big sea right where Kansas and Nebraska and all of that used to be. And so you play an airship pilot and sort of go above the horrible atmospheric things and deliver mail, explore, try to stay floating, to keep floating, and have adventures. And that's been a lot of fun working on.
Is this a brand new world? Because I had never heard of it before.
It is. In 1978, Chaosium published a board game, and by board game I mean very loosely there was a map and a bunch of chips in a bag and a booklet, and called Lords of the Middle Sea, and it was largely inspired by the short story called The Great Nebraska Sea, and the author's name escapes me at the moment, but. We decided that since that is technically still Chaosium IP, it would be fun to do, but we're doing it as a role-playing game at this point, and it's been a lot of fun. It's also a case of me getting to take the basic role-playing system and come up with a version of it that is my absolute favorite, best parts. And so we got an initial manuscript from a writer named John Sneed, who's got a very lengthy list of credits. And then as we developed it, it's it's gotten a lot bigger and a lot more deeper, and I think being customized quite a bit. And that should be out sometime next year.
Okay. That sounds exciting. I'm not that big of a computer game player, but that actually piques my interest.
Yeah, and I think that there's actually a lot of legs there. I'm kind of hoping it spins out into some fiction or various other licenses and whatnot. I think it's got a lot of legs.
Cool. All right. Jason, thank you very much for joining 24 and 42 and letting us learn a little bit about your life, everything, and universe.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Jason. And I look
Day.
forward to seeing the interview and also following your own publishing career and seeing what else comes out from Rogue Blades.
Thank you for giving it a shot.
Okay, cool.
Hey, my thanks to Jason for pulling the curtain back a bit on his life, universe, and everything. Hearing about the writing and the many worlds he does was fascinating, and I, for one, would be eager to read a Jason Durall Call novel. Be sure y'all track down Jason's writings and games, read his info below, and please give his work some reading and reviewing love. Until next time, this was 24 in 42.